the middle of nowhere. It was a small coastal town in Oregon where the biggest news was who had the biggest kite at the annual kite festival.
Oh, wow.
All I knew about the rest of the world was from movies. I was a huge movie buff by the time I was 5 years old. My parents didn't censor what I watched, and I made sure to take in every genre there was. I would watch Casablanca with my father. My mother would make me watch the original Cape Fear before she let me watch the new one. And I'd stay up way past my bedtime watching Nightmare on Elm Street with my older brother. I was a walking IMDb before it was even a thing. There were some pros and cons to watching too many movies. It boosted my creativity and inspired me to write. However, movies relied heavily on stereotypes, and I believed them all. I was sure Texans all had thick accents, wore cowboy hats and boots, and rode either a horse or a pickup truck. If you weren't a massive cocaine smuggler in Florida, you were probably some Cuba salsa dancer in Miami, or a retired person in Palm Beach. All Midwesterners talked like the people in Fargo, don't you know? Southerners were charming and polite, but enormously racist. And all New Yorkers were mean and wouldn't pay any attention to, even if you were being mugged. All of this I learned from movies, of course. Throughout my life, I suffered from panic disorder, agoraphobia, and generalized anxiety. So the thought of moving from my small town was frightening. I did manage to move away for college, but I chose one that was a 45-minute drive from home. And there were several nights during my first year when my mother would bring me home because it was too much. After a year, I settled down, but that was because I got involved in abusive and codependent relationships. These men would isolate me from my friends and family, but I was totally cool with it because it meant I didn't have to leave town or my house. But unfortunately, it came with a lot of control and violence. I completed college in 2005 and was debating whether or not to go to graduate school. But my program wasn't offered anywhere in Oregon, which meant I would have to move far away. My boyfriend at the time certainly didn't want me to leave and began to tell me how he would die if I were to go.
Oh, no.
On a whim, I sent out a bunch of applications for graduate school all over the country, some as far as New York City. I had absolutely no money to go back to school, and there was that little thing called panic disorder. Oops. A few months later, I got a letter from Pace University in New York City. They said that they would gladly accept me into their 2006 graduate program. However, they actually notified me 1 week before the year was to begin. A wave of panic went over me. I decided to call and not accept, but something very strange happened. I said, it's too short notice. I'm all the way here in Oregon, so I can't go. And they responded, we were wrong. So we hope you could join us for our 2007 year. And I accepted. I felt terrible at first. I took a spot that would have been meant for another student who could actually get her butt to New York City. But I had a year to plot and plan and build up the nerve. I privately tutored students, hiding the money they gave me in a sock in my closet. I was later caught by my boyfriend who demanded my money, but I showed him a dummy stash that only had about $50 in it. And he chastised me for charging students too little money as he put it in his pocket. But little did he know, I had about $3 grand behind a stupid guitar he never played. The movies told me that New Yorkers were going to eat me alive. I had nightmares where I was getting mugged. I'm screaming for help and some guy opens his apartment window and tells me to shut up. I couldn't hide this from my boyfriend for long. He told me I would not go under any circumstances. So I spent most of the year trying to convince him that it would be good for both of us. He reluctantly agreed in June, but school started in September. In August, I stepped on the plane to Newark, New Jersey because it was a cheaper flight. I had 3 bags, 1 giant suitcase that carried all of my clothes, and 2 duffel bags with all my belongings. I had never traveled across country before this day. I was also dressed like a school marm. I had a skirt down to my ankles and a blouse with a very high collar. It was an outfit my boyfriend chose for me. I stepped out into the humid, hot August weather and let out a few expletives. I had never experienced weather like this before, and I certainly was going to die in this crappy getup. I confusedly read the maps and what trains to take to New York. I was about to cry when a guy dressed in a suit approached me. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" "West Village." I was gonna stay with a friend of mine, with my boyfriend, until I found a place to live. But the man in the suit directed me to the train that would take me to Manhattan. During the ride, he told me all the tricks to learning the subway system. And we got off the subway together, and he pointed to the top of the steps and said that's where I needed to be. And at that, he disappeared into the crowd before I could thank him. Now at the bottom of the steps, with my large suitcase and 2 duffel bags over my shoulders, I was covered in sweat and cursed a few more times. A man with a grumpy stare took hold of my suitcase and pointed to the top of the steps. He dropped the suitcase once he hit the top and disappeared in the crowd. The next day, when I ventured out on my own, I was at the top of those same steps, staring blankly at the subway map. When I finally put it away, I found that there were a group of serious faces staring up at me. And I slowly reached the bottom of the steps, and they all wanted to know where I was going. South Ferry? "Okay, honey, you need to take this to Fulton Street, and then from there take the 4, 5, or 6 to Whitehall." I missed the Fulton Street station, which then took me into Brooklyn. I just about had a heart attack. Oh God, I kept repeating to myself. The stations in Manhattan were so clean, but the ones in Brooklyn, not so much. I raced to the other side of the tracks and tried to remain calm until the train came back. I found a place to live in Staten Island on Craigslist. This was after I looked at a place in the Bronx where the landlady told me, "Oh, sweetheart, you're too nice to live here." My school was in the financial district. It was adjacent to the World Trade Center, which at the time was long gone and looked like a giant crater in the center of the concrete jungle. One night I was on my way home. I collapsed on a bench near the bull statue and cried and thought, what the hell did I just do? That's when a yellow cab stopped in front of me. He rolled down the window and called out, "Are you okay, honey?" "I'm okay." "Are you sure?" He stared at me for a good minute before he slowly drove away. It was at that moment when I realized I was going to be okay. Later, I would get desperate calls from my boyfriend about how he was experiencing heart palpitations. He had changed his mind about me going away, and I said to him, "It's going to be all right. Just get some rest and call me first thing in the morning." I was telling him this as I was looking up at the lights of Times Square and was in absolute awe of it. I hung up the phone, called my carrier, and requested my number be changed.
Yes.
I haven't talked to him since. I lived in New York for 3 glorious years. It was the best time of my life, and I learned so much. That was 9 years ago. I have lived all over the US since then, and I'm now living happily alone here in Nashville, Tennessee. But if I learned anything from the movies, it would be from Martin Scorsese's New York, New York, when Liza Minnelli sings, "If I can make it here, I can make it anywhere."
Yeah.
Thank you, Darlene. We're going to take a 5-minute break.